Hello all. Today, as the third year architectural design studio at Kadir Has University in the Department of Architecture, we are here with you. And we have a guest lecturer, Kıvanç. Today he's with us. Thank you, Kıvanç, for joining us.
Thank you.
And for those who don't know anything about Kıvanç, he's working at AUB in Lebanon, in Beirut, as a professor. And he's graduated from first University and then Middle East Technical University. And then he did his PhD, completed his PhD in, I forgot, I'm sorry.
State University of New York, SUNY.
I'm sorry.
At Binghamton, yeah.
I'm
no problem.
Because
it's a long title, yeah.
And he's basically an architectural historian, but also he teaches basic design. So today he's with us to explain experiences in Beirut, Lebanon. And also, since we are trying to design a shelter, a community shelter there, he will give us some clues about the society and the physical features of the city. So I think it will be really helpful for our students, and they're seeking for this seminar as well. So thank you, Kıvanç. Let's listen to you. If you have a presentation.
I do, yeah. Yeah, let's. Can I share my screen? Am I allowed to do that? Okay. Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Before I do that, thank you everybody for attending this. I mean, I guess this is a part of your studio meetings anyways, but I'm very happy to be here to talk briefly about Beirut, my Beirut to you. About, I think, half an hour, Ezgi, right? Something like that. I have a lot of images, but I'm not going to spend equal time, amount of time on all of them. I just wanted to illustrate as richly as possible to you my environment and how I understand things. And I'll try to talk about some issues and concepts, main things that I think define Beirut or Lebanese identity a little bit. But this is by no means a very extensive presentation. It's impossible to explain the city, its history, its very complex history, or it's very complex today in such a short time, or ever, I don't know, in any such meeting. So I'm sure you'll be doing your own research, and then as students would be interested in learning about it. Well, and I'll be happy to, if you email me, follow-up questions, I'll be happy to answer you throughout your semester. Okay, so let me share my presentation more specifically. Is everybody able to see it?
I think so. I can see it.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, I think this is better, right? This is the very nice poster you designed. So I put it as the first page. Okay, so let me check the time so that I'll be following up on that. 12:08. Good. So when I offered this title, Roots and Beiruts, well, it's inspired by a sort of guidebook which is called Beiruts with a pun, in the name. But also, when I think of Beirut, I think of different routes to and from it in terms of its physicality, but also its history. And roots, when you are a Beiruti or a Lebanese, I guess it becomes a very important word, especially because of the civil war and when people had to scatter throughout the world, and then when they came back and looking for their roots, or this concept becomes very prominent. And I think there are many Beiruts, not one. So that also explains the third one. So I'll try to dwell on these things in relation to some other important keywords, I think, that explains Beirut, like identity, memory, conflict, migration and the refugee crisis, it's being a divided city, right? Or it's being a very congested, very dense urban environment. And you know, these are visible or invisible divisions that I'll try to talk about and give you a sense of the place as much as I can in this limited amount of time. So let's begin with some lyrics that belongs to a group I used to listen a lot when I was a college student. Ezgi'nin Günlüğü, maybe you're aware of them. They have a song called Beirut from 1993. This is 3 years after the Civil War ends. I took the liberty of translating it to English myself another time, not for this presentation, but I find it powerful, not the music that much, to be honest with you, but the lyrics especially. So I copied and pasted here. I mean, feel free to have a look at it for a few seconds, but I'll be picking up certain lines from here as part of my presentation, and I'll link them to our discussion, I hope, or just as inspirational quotes, you know, for our discussion of Beirut. Now, I highlighted something here. Oh, the city, you're no longer here. Ey şehir sen yoksun. Şarkıdaki haliyle. This is quite striking to me whenever I look at it, because it's not only metaphorically that the city is no longer there when you are back to it after certain years, but it's not there physically either because of the demolition of the Civil War, all the conflicts and everything. So this kind of gives this always a sense of nostalgia or longing or some sort of sadness to it, but it is balanced very well with its joy, and, you know, that the feeling of being alive and happy over there as well. So we'll be seeing all these different things, I guess, together. Yeah, so let's begin with roots and continue from here. Now, when I first think of Beirut, my Beirut, as I said, what I think is that it's Mediterranean identity before anything else, or it's Levantine identity. When you think of the Ottoman port cities of the 19th century, right? Izmir, Selanik, and Beirut, they're quite similar to each other. So when you go there, and if you're familiar with one of the other two cities, I'm sure perhaps you've been to Izmir before, you'll see striking similarities. Well, it's a very different city, of course, but you have that sense of outgoingness in people, of the shores being lively at all times. People, you know, are enjoying life and whatnot. All the cliche, you know, related to Izmir, you can apply to Beirut. So the first thing is the Mediterranean identity. So like the cordon in Izmir, you have the Corniche. It's the seaside at the center of the city, one of the centers. So on the one side, you have this view of, obviously, Beirut is always collage-like when you look at it. I'll talk about that. But you have this crazy construction going on, which is very familiar to us as well, right? As well as some aging buildings and not well-maintained buildings or left alone buildings on one side, and some niches for the old fishermen sort of pockets in the sea. Few of them still exist there. And you see there very typical Ottoman era building, which was restored. So it's always like a hodgepodge of different periods and styles. But when you look at the other side, then you immediately have the sea, right? The Mediterranean. This is American University of Beirut's beach that you see to the left with the tower over there. So where I'm standing is basically the campus. So you have this road, which is called Corniche, and that connects the city to the sea. This is very close to Hamra, right? Then I think one of your sites, or I'm not sure if all the project sites are from Hamra SB, but I think one of them is definitely. And cats. It's a very cat-friendly country, and campuses are cat-friendly. So that's important for me. That's why I put it here. I'm not sure if it's important to understand Beirut, but to me it is. So that's, she's a friend of mine. And it's a very ancient place. Many Lebanese identify themselves or have links in their mind to this heritage, obviously, but especially to Phoenicians. Phoenicians, you know, they are an old Mediterranean civilization. And, you know, the Roman Empire built a lot of stuff in this country as well. Very, very impressive old cities you can go and visit. Obviously, it's an Arab nation. So Arabic identity or the Arab identity is basically very prominent, and the language, the Arabic, although I have to say, I have to immediately add to that, is that it's a very sort of mixed community. It's a very ethnically, you know, multi-ethnic and multi-religious community, let's say. So you'll have different religions, different ethnicities or groups of people, different cultures living together. The total number of people, I think there has been a census very recently, but 6 million, about 6 million people live in Lebanon. Well, you have, you know, this amazing variety that of people that live there together. And these images are very typical, where you see the mosque on the one side and the church on the other side. Well, this is not from Beirut, by the way. This is from Byblos, an ancient Phoenician city, or Jiveil in its Arabic form. But you'll have these everywhere in the country. Sometimes you'll have neighborhoods or villages that are Christian and Muslim, you know, they're not mixing much, but you'll find them in certain areas that are very close to each other. Okay. Well, in terms of architecture, or when you think of culture in general, you have Beirut as an Ottoman city, right? So you have the Ottoman heritage, you know, the Ottoman rule of Lebanon. I mean, the area, which was part of Syria at the time, was about 400 years, right? So it's a very long history all over the country. You have that very strongly felt. And then you have the French Mandate period, right? When Lebanon became part of, I mean, not part of technically, but under the French Mandate for about 20 years, I think, from 1920s to 45, I believe. I might be wrong, so I apologize if I am. Then you have architecture from that period as well. And then you have this period where Beirut especially blossomed, became very famous. I mean, you might have heard people talking about it like the Paris of Mediterranean, something like that, you know. So especially in the 1950s and 60s, until 1975, when the Civil War broke out. I hope I'm not making any mistakes with the dates. You have this amazing architectural, kind of vernacular modernist architectural vocabulary, very, very, you know, high quality examples of that period, with the local touches of architects over there. So it's like an architecture museum, you know, when you walk around. Right. So when we talk about the roots, you know, after thinking about roots in general. Now, again, I'm going back to the issue of the Civil War, which for about 15 years continued and devastated this country, and especially Beirut. There was the famous Green Line, where the city was divided into two, between two camps. And they were fighting with each other, but also within each other at times. So they were always shifting alliances and multiple pockets and divisions within that very complex history. Not gonna go into that, but its effects on the urban environment and the people, obviously, was devastating. Many people had to leave the country or change their homes multiple times, trying to find a secure place, you know, within this environment that was quite violent. Then after the 90s, when the war ended officially, this is from the downtown area. You know, when you look at the map and you see Hamra, and then you have, say, you'll see a neighborhood called Ain Mreise, and then you have this the downtown, which was renovated. The first thing, because the Green Line passed through it, right? So they sort of cleaned it, and they gentrified this neighborhood with you know, restoring and rebuilding and adding more contemporary buildings. I guess it's a way of dealing with the trauma of the war, right? You erase its past, its traces in the city, and you rebuild it very quickly. I felt all the time that there was a rush of rebuilding, perhaps just to, get rid of that, understandably. But this is the where downtown goes through the port when the horrible blast happened, in August. It's kind of I'll show the images in the end. But this is the area where you reach the sea again. This is Zeytuna Bay. Zeytun means zeytin, yani olive in Arabic. And then you'll see this very kind of global forms of architecture and development, right? In this very sort of gentrified place of the city. But at the back, if you pay attention, at the very back, there is a building that shows the effects of the war. This was a hotel, a chain hotel, which was about to be opened right before the Civil War started, but it wasn't, it didn't happen. And then this building particularly became a site of armed struggle and everything for many years by different groups. So it still is there, not being repaired or replaced. So it's kind of constant memorabilia, right? Memory of the war, not memorabilia, sorry for the wrong word. That reminds you constantly of what happened. And it's everywhere. When you walk in Beirut, you'll see the sandbags still, that remain from the war. These buildings with the bullet wounds, or contemporary artists are sort of, called for doing murals on the walls of war-torn buildings like this. Or that's when you see these images, side by side, where there's the new construction craze and the old ones still there. Most probably the owners didn't come back, or there are issues of property and who knows what, but you always had those images. Or the windows were closed off to protect themselves from the, the war going on around. This is a very interesting building. This was actually, I think, designed by one of the architects who worked for the Ottoman Sultans as well back then. But in the 1920s, the wealthy family commissioned this as a house, as a residence in Beirut. With the Civil War, they had to leave. And then this turned into, because it had a prominent location at a corner, it turned into a very kind of popular spot for the snipers to be located. And so the building was heavily damaged and was used, as a kind of base in the war. After the Civil War ended, with few people's initiative, actually, they turned this into a museum. It's called Beit Beirut. Beit means house in Arabic. So like the Beirut house, right? It turned into a kind of a living museum of the Civil War. So the bullet, the traces of the bullets were left as they are. It's a very interesting restoration project, actually. Check it out. And you can see that some metal parts replacing, just going there to complete the parts. So they didn't replace anything. They didn't add anything in concrete. But they came up with this very interesting, and it shows you, the sort of the realities of the Civil War back then in Lebanon. And there are always interesting collections and exhibitions in it. So it's a very good museum to and an exhibition hall to visit. Right now, when we think of many Beiruts, right, whichever you want to choose, well, I mentioned that it has this collage-like quality, right? Nothing is really sort of matching with the other object next to them. So there's always this cacophony, which I find very fascinating. And we have to mention, of course, the extreme poverty and the difficulties. I mean, we talked about the effects of the Civil War, but the remnants of that and the very, at some neighborhoods, the streets are so narrow, they're like corridors, right? And infrastructure problems. So these make life very difficult for the great majority of Beirutis and the Lebanese people. But it's also surprising and funky architecture. When you walk around, you see something quite interesting that catches your eye at all times. So that's also very interesting. Now, it's Beirut is also famous for its, you know, entertainment life and nightlife, and people are enjoying themselves. This is before the economic crisis that started last October and the social unrest which followed, and the blast. So you're looking at Gemeze, is one of the very popular streets called Guro street in Gemeze. This is toward the more Christian part of the town. It wasn't always this crowded and populated, but there were a special event for a couple of days, so I took this picture. But this is basically how Beirut likes to live their life, you know, livefully as much as they can. Again, all different groups and cultures of societies and colors and ethnicities, you know, they have their sort of types of entertainment, and it's always you know, a thing to see when you walk around. So if things get back to normal, I guess, for the world and for Lebanon as well, I encourage you to see this city and enjoy its you know, scenes and streets and life. Right. So a couple of notes of what happened since last year. First, there was the social unrest and demonstrations. The Lebanese called it Thavra, means revolution. And, you know, that's sort of changed the country really. An economic crisis followed, and still, since then, it has been in trouble in terms of its currency losing its value and all the, you know, difficulties in daily life for the Lebanese. At the back here on the second picture, what you see is the Grand Sarai. It's the seat of the president today of Lebanon. It was built by the Ottoman administration back then, so it's an Ottoman building. Just as a side note, and talking about migration and the refugees. Well, Lebanon has a long history of housing them and having refugees on their lands. It started with the Palestinians who had to leave their lands because of the Israeli invasion back in the 1940s. And so there are many neighborhoods today in Beirut and in Lebanon that turned into permanent neighborhoods. They started as camps, temporary camps, like, you know the image of a camp, right? Refugee camp with tents and basic structures. With makeshift kind of structures that they turned into really like high-rise, not high-rise, but mid-rise apartment building type of very, very dense, congested places, really. So that is there. But also more recently, right, there has been a flux of Syrian refugees to Lebanon. And you know, Turkey is the country, and we're hosting the most number of Syrian refugees in the world. But when you think about the size of Lebanon, there are 6 million, and at one point, I think there were more than 1 million Syrian refugees in the country. I don't know, 3-4 years ago, perhaps. So you can imagine the weight and impact of that, you know, event or that number on the country. So life is very difficult, obviously, for the refugees, and there are many exhibitions and you know, events by the humanitarian groups and civil society organizations to help these communities, to house them, to sort of, and Lebanon doesn't have refugee camps. Officially, they don't have to build any refugee camps, thinking that people will stay there if we do that, right? So they just leave them alone in a negative sense, yeah. So they have to find their way through the rural or urban areas. So the problem is very visible everywhere. And this condition of the people, it's quite heartbreaking. And the blast, this explosion, I think August the 4th it was. So you're looking at the same street I showed you a couple of slides before, with people enjoying life, you know, when being outside and, you know, on the streets. Gemeze, I think through Mar Mikhael, through the end of that, you know, street, the same street. Right, so it was, I mean, I wasn't there, but it was a devastating, shocking, obviously unprecedented, to an unprecedented scale. Yani. It's like an atomic bomb, right? You might have read about these things. So this is close to the blast site, closer, 500 to 1 kilometer, meters to 1 kilometer, I think. So the Ashrafia area, this Christian neighborhood was affected really badly. Again, you can imagine its impact, especially on the older buildings of the architectural heritage and how badly they are damaged. They were already under immense pressure for development because of the construction and replacing them, but this became another shock. And the daily lives of the people, from anything, objects from the city to the, nice cafes you frequented to people's houses. I mean, imagine that 300,000 people or 400,000 people were affected by this, and they're trying to find a sheet of glass to repair their homes, but they can't because everybody is looking for glass now, right? So it's just sheer amount of tragedies that unfortunately followed last year's events. But the Lebanese are very resilient, and they're known for it, kind of, rising from their ashes all the time. They're very they know how to survive, I guess. So their organizational skills are very good. The dysfunctional state is there. It can't help really, but people are trying to, So our space is destroyed, but we're not. It's kind of the feeling. Although this time it's very, very, very hard. Yeah, it's been too much. I guess this is the lightest way to put it. So we'll all see what happens. Right, now finally, I'd like to show you a few images from Hamra, the neighborhood that I lived when I was in Beirut. Currently, I'm not there. I'm teaching online from Turkey, but I'm technically there. So this is where the university I worked for is there, AUB, American University of Beirut. This is where you reach the sea, Mediterranean, and that's one of the centers of the city where kind of the used to be very kind of axis of development right before the Civil War. It was very popular with the hotels that were opened, and famous people from Europe and United States would come and stay, and became very kind of hip area at the time. Well, this is my neighbor. So my apartment wasn't affected by the blast. This is about 3 to 4 kilometers away from the blast site, but she's my landlady too. She was sitting in her apartment. Obviously, it wasn't closer to the glass. Nothing happened to her, but this is this is the effect on your daily life. Suddenly, this happens, when you're sitting and reading in silence and peace. And this is a view from my terrace of the house that I lived in. I still live in, technically. So again, it's very condensed, very dense. I mean, the size of things, I mean, the height of the buildings are very, very different, obviously. But when you pay attention, you'll see that everything is angular here, right? Because unlike the other sites that I showed today, Hamra was designed on a grid. So you have this rectangular or angular kind of relationship. Everything is, perpendicular to one another, 90-degree angles. That is one thing. I would say a typical street in Hamra, as you can see, all the cables and stuff over your head because of the infrastructure problems. Electricity cuts are normal in Beirut, so you have to buy generators. You have to, kind of steal a bit of electricity from somewhere. Yeah, so this is basically one of the scenes of the neighborhood. The university is there, the architecture and design. This building is currently renovated and a bit extended. Well, what do you have here? You have famous still cafes that are very old, like the Cafe Yunus. I frequented a lot, almost every day. It's a great place to work. You have famous hotels, as I mentioned, like the Mayflower. They're still open, but they used to be very, very kind of famous before in the 60s and 70s. And you have again this unattended and repaired and maintained sort of apartments around, obviously, or they're emptied or they're waiting to be replaced, right? That kind of story. And you also have urban apartment buildings that are squatted by the refugees. So you have several of these in Hamra as well. People simply went into sort of squat, occupy, or live in these houses that were empty, right? And then the government doesn't really do anything about it, just, doesn't, pretends that they don't see it, and life goes on, I guess. Yeah, so this is, I'm ending it with a pretty sad picture, but this is, I guess, the reality of it. So this is, I believe, the end of my presentation. Yes, it is. So should I stay here, or should I unshare my screen? Ezgi Hocam, what do you suggest? You can go back to some images, or I can simply answer if there are any questions by your students.
Let me check. There's no question on YouTube, so I'll end the stream. Then we'll go on.
Thank you.
Thank you.